Good morning and welcome to Plain Speaking, sponsored by the Blair County Democratic Committee, and it is the party that represents you, the American citizen, and we are very happy today to have a stellar panel with us to discuss some very significant issues that are impacting the lives of everyone in one extent or another, but we will be taking a look at them all. And I would like to introduce the panel very quickly. To my far left, Marty, very active in the Democratic Party. He's a committee rep from the Duncansville area. He's also the parliamentarian of the party. And if you come to a meeting and get a little obstreperous, Mr. Barona will probably show you the door. And to my immediate right is Robin Aurandt, a member of our state committee as well as the local committee and vice chair for the 80th District. And to my immediate left is George Thompson, our resident historian and research director and treasurer of the party. So we have, as I said, a bunch of issues to talk about, and we're not going to dwell very in-depth in any of them because we decided today to do a little bit of interactive discussion about some issues. And the first one we want to bring to your attention is an issue that is being blown, as in my simple mind, way out of proportion, and that is the condemnation that our president is getting because he happened to shake hands with a guy by the name of Raul Castro, who is the current president of Cuba. And he's being vilified from stem to stern, particularly by our so-called conservative and right-wing folks. And when they do things like this, they deserve to be called wackos, because I don't think that is an objectionable thing in the front of hundreds of millions of people. It would have been worse if he would have snubbed the guy. Then what would the headlines have been? Yeah. So what do you think, George? Too much ado about nothing?
No, absolutely. Likewise, the impending divorce of Michelle and Barack over the frown that seems to keep getting shown. And the photographer who made the pictures, he felt obliged to put out other photos just a few seconds before the frown. Michelle was smiling to the Queen of Denmark.
Yeah.
These media, they tend to like to get a lot of sales, and so that's an effective way to sell papers, making all these outrageous statements. But to get back to the handshake, I mean, Nelson Mandela represented an openness towards everyone. That's one of the reasons he was being eulogized. And how would that come over if Barack Obama walks right by Raul Castro?
Particularly since Castro put his hand on. What are you going to do?
I mean, to me, it's a non-issue.
Yeah. Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah. Once again, I agree with George. It's all about sensationalism and blowing up things so they can get sales for their papers.
But the thing is I've seen also McCain and people like that are coming out and condemning him. Marty, what's your take?
Well, I think it's ridiculous, but remind the listeners that McCain shook hands with Gaddafi, and he was an international terrorist, so that was okay.
Of great, yes. Yeah. So again, folks, what we're trying to say basically is, you don't want to act like an ignoramus, and that is a common courtesy. I mean, there are some people that I meet in my life that I don't have a great deal of love for, and I may not even like.
Yeah.
But if I'm in a situation where a hand is put out, I am not going to deliberately, make me look like...
That's classless.
That is
really
classless, right? Okay. Okay, let's get into some issues right now that are more important to a lot of people. I think these public relations ideas are just a little out of hand. But there's been a lot of talk about the minimum wage. And for many of you who are watching the show, I'm sure, have gone through jobs where you earned a minimum wage. And it's a well-known fact that $7.25 an hour, which is the current minimum wage, is not enough to sustain a normal family under any circumstance.
No.
And yet, the National Congress has refused to introduce a bill that would raise it. The president is supporting a $10 minimum wage. Out in San Francisco, it's up to $15 an hour. And our governor one-term Tom is refusing to even consider a raise. So what's the panel think? What should we look at? What should we tell these people?
Well, first of all, Walmart, in my mind, is getting a subsidy by this issue because they can pay a low wage and the people can't survive, as you point out, Frank. So then they go on government programs, food stamp programs, subsidized health care. The employer traditionally has paid the bill for these items. But, places that pay a low wage, they couldn't get away with it if it wouldn't be for these government programs supplementing their low wages. So in my mind, it's a handout to the companies.
And not only a subsidy, but Walmart pays no Pennsylvania state sales tax. So, am I correct?
Yeah.
So they're getting subsidies and
you mean income tax?
Yeah,
perhaps.
and
they
that's
pay
what I mean.
sales tax, but
not sales.
In fact, even the Chamber of Commerce backs this up. 70% of all corporations that do business in Pennsylvania do not pay taxes to the state. 70% of them.
Income taxes, yeah.
And so the whole thing is that they're here freeloading from that respect, but then they pay substandard wages. I don't know what $7.25 an hour, even if you worked 40 hours a week, I don't think you would get.
When gas is $3.49 a gallon, I mean that's half your first. You know what I mean? That's half your.
That's right. That's
hour.
Half when I was paying.
So how can you live when
that's a poverty level?
You have to get to work.
I think that's a poverty level.
Yeah.
Payment, and it's ridiculous to think that a family, and then somebody, I just heard one of these wackos said the other day, well, they shouldn't have any kids then if they can't afford them.
Well, the one thing has nothing to do with the other. The fact of the matter is this disparity of income is an issue that I think is going to be more and more talked about. I noticed Pope Francis had a big speech, so to speak, on the disparity of income worldwide.
Yeah.
I have an article written by this lady, Margaret Carlson. She used to...
Margaret Carlson.
Margaret Carlson.
Oh, sure.
She had articles. She used to be a writer for Time magazine, but now she writes for Bloomberg. And I pay attention when I see her articles because I actually knew her from high school. She grew up in Harrisburg and went to the same high school as I did. So in any case, she's making her case in this most recent article in Bloomberg about how the Pope has really put his finger on a lot of the problems around the world where you have people earning extravagant amounts of money right in the midst of people that are poverty-stricken.
Yeah.
And, first of all, is this even morally right?
No.
And even if you get morals out of it, and the answer is no. It's not morally right in most religions. That's one of the fundamentals. The Muslim religion has that as a sort of a prohibition that you should share your wealth. The Christians have that long tradition, share your wealth. But yet over here it's somehow some sort of...
greed is good.
Yeah, it's a good. Preach capitalism, that's what it's all about, the people getting ahead. And it benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Well, it's not true at all.
No.
And the Pope Francis, he puts his finger on it.
And he was criticized. I was watching a program yesterday in which several people, including the Mouth of the South, Limbaugh, coming out condemning him and comparing to some obscene example of the Pope getting involved in these things. Well, if you care about people, you can't be selective. You can't be selective. And living in poverty, and there are at least 47 million people who are on food stamps, minimum. And they're going to lose them because we are now taking a look at this budget compromise.
I guess that's coming up in January. That's part of this
the farm bill and
compromise.
The food stamps.
But, I want to say something, though. I was talking to a person who's telling me that her sister and her child, getting this $500 payment for food, living on lobster, and I noticed you had a little handout here,
Yes.
Frank, and this is my research says the average person gets about $133 a month on food stamps. That qualifies. Most people don't qualify. Now, that is not an extravagant amount of money, $133 per person.
Absolutely not.
But there's these rumors that float out there with these wild figures, and it's so hard to track this stuff down because I get them on an email form. And it's a little easier to track down when it's on email form because I'm sitting at the computer and I go into factcheck.org, things like that. And normally there's chain mails that have no truth, and the fact check has researched the wild claims. But anyway, these payments aren't very high,
and they're not extravagant. And this listing of 20 things that people say that poor people do every day, and it was written by a woman by the name of Corley, who interviewed wealthy as well as poor people. And a couple of them will just mention, people who are poor search for affordable housing if they can find it. Yeah. And George, I know you rent out to people, and I know you have some people who are probably getting Section 8 help and so on, but so a lot of those people can't afford to, pay the full rent themselves.
Well, that's right.
But these poor people who are living on less than $25,000 a year, and they, like you said, they try to feed themselves and their family on $133 worth of food stamps. They subsist sometimes on poor quality food because they buy the cheapest things they can get, and sometimes they're not the most nutritious.
Yeah.
They don't contain the protein and the fiber that sustain people, and they skip meals. And that's why schools have been reaching out to poor people and having lunches and breakfast for these kids, because sometimes they're the only meals they get.
Yeah, at least they'll get 2 hot meals a day.
And locally we have these people that don't seem to get it. You have so many people, for example, in subsidized housing that are elderly.
Yeah.
And they'll be the first to criticize the people that are getting subsidized housing. The young people, I think, is on their mind because they don't view themselves as benefiting from these programs, but yet they are.
Yeah.
And they also receive supplemental food. But yet they'll be the first to condemn these programs, like somehow we're subsidizing lazy, drunken bums or something.
Yeah,
and they would never view themselves, and they aren't. I mean, I view it as this happens to people in life, and I'm certainly not willing to stand around and let people starve.
Yeah, fortunately, yes, exactly, George. Fortunately, they've never been hungry, apparently. Because if you're hungry, then you realize you don't want anyone else to be hungry, you know what I mean?
And a lot of these people have a couple of jobs. And if they have children and they got to work 2 and 3 jobs to survive, do they have the time and energy to give the children the same kind of loving care and direction and support that people who are sufficiently well off to do? I mean, it impacts in that respect too.
Well, which Head Start is one of the programs that is going to get a little more funding under this recent compromise, but people don't get it with Head Start. You have mothers that have no family around them. They want to work, and they can't because they have children that they have to care for, and Head Start helps in that way.
Yeah.
Plus, it also is a proven benefit for educational attainment for their children.
And another thing, too, they say these people should get a job, and the argument is, well, a lot of them aren't trained. Well, then they say, why don't they go get trained? Well, let's take a mother who has 3 children under the age of 8, let's say, and she doesn't have a husband for whatever reason. She doesn't own a car. Is there public transportation that would take her to the training site? And are there training sites within reason for these people to go to? And who would take care of her kids when she did that? So, the condemnation of the people who are less than sustainable when it comes to income is terrible. I mean, they are looked upon as, well, like the
Pariahs.
Pariahs, yeah. I mean, Marty, why are we doing this to these people?
Ignorance, plain ignorance. They just don't understand. They don't have compassion. They don't have compassion for people. My sister-in-law down in Lancaster said one time, "I'm tired." She said this to her senator down there. "I'm tired of paying my tax money for people that won't work. He said, Jane, you got to understand, these people need help, and if you don't help them, they're going to turn to robbery, and you're going to pay for that in the long run.
Yeah.
People need help.
Yeah.
See, it's an image that they are suffering under. And I compare it to like people who have addictions. You know, most people in the streets think people who have addictions like to alcohol and drugs and so on, that they're the scum of the earth, you know, they're bad people. But yet, just like poverty affects good people, so do addictions and so do other problems. So compassion, a good word.
Yeah, one accident or away from poverty, sometimes, you know, if you have an accident, you get disabled, you could end up being in poverty through no fault of your own.
I always like to bring it back to the person, that they could be under these same circumstances, and many of the people don't associate like it's a smart strategy to dispose of all your assets when you think you're going to end up in a nursing home and have the government pay for your nursing home care, and they don't think twice about doing that. That's smart strategy. Go to a lawyer, and the lawyer will advise you how to set it all up. Well, 2/3 of the payments in Pennsylvania's Medicaid system are for things like this. They're either for elderly in nursing homes, or they're for handicapped people, mentally challenged people in nursing home settings. And that's 2/3 of the people. And yet the Medicaid is roundly criticized by all sorts of people. Yeah. So these people understand that they may be one of the recipients of this as they approach where they have to go to.
This is the dichotomy that I think is so outrageous. And there are so many people who claim to be quote-unquote Christian, and they use the Bible as their guide for good living and so on. But yet it is very clear in the Bible, from my understanding, is that Jesus once said, "What you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me." So if you're denying people of a decent way to live, if you're denying them benefits, if you're denying them health care, isn't that a violation of what?
It would appear to me to be that way.
And you know, when I challenge people about that, they just turn the topic around.
Hypocrites is what they're called.
Well, a lot of times they'll view the government as not the proper entity to service these situations. They would view religion as, and historically, religion has provided sort of care, both medical care. The Catholic Church, of course, has had numerous hospitals, but somehow...
But they're going to refuse care to people who want to use contraceptives.
Oh, well, they do. Actually, one of the hospitals is being sued right now. The mother had a fetus that was basically dying inside her, and the normal medical procedure would have been to abort
it in the hospital.
And the problem was the mother was put in danger of death because their infection had started. And the hospital, because they were following Catholic Church policies, refused to abort that pregnancy. And the mother almost did die. They finally had to abort because
she would have died.
The mother was going to die too, and along with the baby.
Yeah. See, that would be malpractice. It would seem to me if the medical profession would deny care for that person because of some religious belief, you would think that the person who then died could sue for failure to provide adequate service. You know, it's such a dilemma. Compassion. Why don't we have compassion?
Doesn't the oath say do no harm? The doctors take?
Yes, do no harm. Okay, we're going to take our first break, and we'll be right back. And we're talking about some very serious issues, and I hope those of you who are viewing at least believe in our concept that we should be compassionate and help one another. Let's take our break.
My Jamie, she was my baby girl, my precious baby girl. When Jamie was a teenager, she would spend her lunch hours going to the tanning salons. I didn't realize how dangerous they were. If you tan when you're young, your risk for melanoma are increased by 75%. That's huge. What I would say to mothers that allow their daughters to tan. No mother should have to visit their daughter in a cemetery. One person an hour dies from melanoma. Jamie's hour was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, March 16th, 2007. I hope no one else has to mark their hour.
This message is brought to you by the American Academy of Dermatology.
Savings Man here with a story for you about two young spenders named Tommy and Sue. Their parents let them buy whatever they chose, like video games and designer clothes. As they grew older, they spent all their pay on fancy cars, houses, 2 lattes a day. They lived in the moment, never saving a dime. When they tried to retire, they'd run out of time. Working forever is Tom and Sue's fate, so choose to save now before it's too late. Visit our website to find out more, because a happy ending's worth saving for.
65. 100,000 they were talking. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are in the throes of a lot of controversies happening in this country, this state, this city, this county, and we talked about some of them, and we're going to touch on a few more. And there's one that is of great significance to a lot of people, particularly those of us who belong to unions and those of us who get service from union-supported employees, the folks out at Penelec. Now, lo and behold, they're not on strike. They're picketing. Why? Marty, tell us why they're picketing.
They're locked out, and I want to show this page put on by the Sierra Club. It shows First Energy failing working families. Very interesting article, and I have a little bit of expertise in this subject since I spent 27 years at Penelec, and so I know what has been going on for the last 10 or 12 years. We used to be Penelec only. Then they merged with a company called Metropolitan Edison. So we have a president of Penelec was Bob Wise. Fred Hafer was president of Metropolitan Edison, so you got one company now and 2 presidents. So what do? They make Fred Hafer the president. And the first thing Fred did, he got with Governor Ridge, and he changed how he deregulated the electric industry in Pennsylvania. And then the second mistake he made was sold generating. We're in the business of generating electricity and selling to our customers, and he sells generating. So,
who generates the power now?
A private company. They sold it to they figured it was worth $1.5 billion, but they got $3.1 billion for it. That company kept it for a year, sold it, and then doubled their money. Now we have no generating. And then they decided, well, we're going to merge with First Energy. In the last year we were on our own 2 feet, we lost $250 million. And you can't do that every year and not go bankrupt. So First Energy bought us out. And the first thing First Energy did was, well, they had to honor the Penelec's contract. That was good till 2003. And then as soon as that contract was up, they took away the work gloves, and they took the coveralls that protect outside workers.
And they were provided by the employer. Now they're not.
Yeah, and then they give them a large 1% increase in their wages, and
that'll cover the suit that they have to buy and the gloves they have to buy to protect themselves.
And they keep taking and taking and taking. In 2009, the employees agreed to a 5% pay cut. And the company said, we will not forget what you did for us. Well, apparently they did. And then that Scott Surgener, he's a representative of First Energy, he made a statement to the press on Channel 10, said, in the history of First Energy, we've never had a lockout. Well, I thought, well, you don't have to have one now. And there was a couple sticking points on the contract. Employees retiring from 2005 on will no longer have health care. And they want everybody hiring from here on to go to a cash balance pension plan, but they wouldn't give them any details on it. Just sign it and we'll work detail that later. and it just keeps going downhill and going downhill and going downhill. And now they have Tony Alexander, he's the CEO. In 2011, he was making $18.3 million. And 2012, they upped that to $23.3 million.
So that's about a $5 million.
Yes.
Let's take a look at this once. When they're complaining about the cost of employee health care after retirement.
Yeah.
What is the yearly cost for that, to the best of your knowledge?
I went to a union meeting last Monday, and Bob Whalen, he's the union rep down east. He said that we have like 5,500 retired employees, and it costs the company $250,000 a year.
Okay,
That's
so
a drop in the bucket.
$250,000 a year. So if you take a look at the CEO who makes a $5 million increase in pay for one man, if you would take $1 million of that, you would have enough to pay for 4 years of health care.
Yes, and that's just one man. I
and that's
wonder
one
what
man.
the other
and
people
what the rest
make.
of the people are making. So the inequity is just outrageous.
Yeah, and also there was they paid out $40 million to 5 of the top managers in First Energy. $40 million to 5 people, and right now they have, and they also paid out $16 million to get their name on a sports stadium out in Cleveland.
$16 million for that.
$16 million.
So 5 for the president, 40 for the executives, and $16 million.
You could. On this property, I've been on the picket line every day for almost 3 weeks. I don't have to be, but I need to support
I was there one
people.
day, and I should
need
go
to
back
support
again.
These people. They've got trucks from Metropolitan Edison. They've got trucks from Diversified Services from Alabama. They've got trucks from Virginia and trucks from Metropolitan Edison. They've got oodles of trucks in there, and they have to pay those employees' wages. They have to pay for their motels, their meals. It's costing them a lot of money
To keep people locked out.
Far cheaper to settle the contract and have our own employees working on the property. And when they went to work Monday, right before Thanksgiving, the guys that went in, apparently they had a list of all who was allowed in, who wasn't. So some of the guys went in. They said, "You're trespassing on private property. You're locked out, and if you don't leave, you'll be subject to arrest."
So it's just outrageous. And just so the viewers understand, and I was in the union business for 45 years, when the employer and the employee union negotiate, you try to come to a mutually agreeable solution. If you can't, 2 things can happen. Number one, the employees can strike. Or secondly, which happened here, if management is not willing to negotiate, then they can say, this is our final last best offer, and you take it or else. And unfortunately, the way the courts have been ruling, these companies have that right under the law to say that this is our honest to goodness last best offer, and that's what happened at Penelec. And as we've shown you here, at least verbally, of the great inequity, if they would have taken a few of these millions that they're paying these people to manage the company, we wouldn't have had a problem.
Yeah. 2 more points I want to bring up. In 2012, now Tony Alexander is going to retire in 2015. In 2012, they give him a $9.3 million retention bonus for him to stay. And making that kind of money.
To how much money? 18 million. He already.
18 million, and then he bumped it up to 23.3 million. Another mistake they made out there. They closed down Evansburg operating. Bedford and Huntington brought all the people, the linemen and all the support groups, up to Altoona. And then you have to take, if you have an outage way up the other end of Cameron County, or Huntington, which goes clean into Mount Union, you got to take a great big line truck that probably gets 5 miles a gallon and run it all the way down there.
Instead of having a satellite office in those counties. See, it's the
mistake after mistake. One of the guys out there said he was watching Kramer on mad money. And this guy called in and he said, I have some money I want to put into utilities, and here's the 3 utilities. And he named the 3, and one of them was First Energy, and Kramer said, do not buy First Energy. They're mismanaged and they're going down.
Well, Kramer's the guy that started the Tea Party stuff too a couple of years ago.
Well,
but anyway, folks, we want you to understand, and Marty is a very good expert on this whole thing, but the people at Penelec, the employees, are not being treated fairly.
This is Penelec in name only.
Yeah, it's
all the orders are coming from Ohio, Akron, Ohio, First Energy.
The disparity is...
It's a nasty company.
Well, it's not the only company where the disparity of income between the CEOs and the regular workers is tremendous.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the average disparity is like a CEO gets paid 233 times more than
and
an
in some
average
cases up to 1,000 times more.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there is. I'm saying the average salary. You know,
it is
and
obscene.
people believe, I guess, that this is acceptable business. But let me just tell you, in the rest of the world, companies operate with far less of a disparity. The CEOs in most companies in Europe, for example, about 40 times the CEO gets what the average salaried worker gets. I mean, here in the United States, it's just
it is
tremendously
obscene,
different.
and I think Marty's done well in showing the great disparity, and George has certainly buttressed that by talking about this whole thing. But you know, all we hear from people is those unions. What about that management? You know, these people in management are refusing to bargain. Now, if we refused to bargain as a union, we could be charged with an unfair labor charge.
Here's a nice picture they took out in front of Tony Alexander's house.
Oh.
A rat. First Energy, we smell a rat.
Well, and the thing is, there are issues that could be settled at the table if they would come to the table.
Yeah.
The union reps are saying, and the union members are saying, we will negotiate.
Well, the union... The company called for a meeting on Monday over in Pittsburgh. So the union guys went over, and they said, "What are your sticking points on the contract?" He said, "Well, the health care thing." He said, "Is that your top priority?" He said, "No, but that's one of them." They closed up their books and they got up and walked out.
Well,
That's
hopefully...
negotiating?
No, it is not. And hopefully we'll get some resolution to this soon, because Christmas is coming now, and I'm sure, and I'm hopefully that those folks who are at least qualify for unemployment compensation.
Well, they signed up, but the company has to fill out papers too, and
they'll probably wait and wait and wait, yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Marty, for that report. And folks, please take a good look at the statistics, listen to what the facts are. It's not the darn union. In this case, it's that darn management who won't negotiate. So there are two parties to every dispute. Okay, let's go to the next issue we wanted to talk about, and that was the budget agreement that was approved at least by Senator Patty Murray of Washington on the Democratic side, and Senator Paul Ryan, Representative Paul Ryan on the Republican side. They came up with an agreement, and already. And I heard Boehner say this morning, which is something that is out of character for him lately. A reporter was asking him a question about, you've seen the agreement, and Ryan was standing right behind him. He said, "You seen the agreement?" He said, and there were some people, and Boehner interrupted. He said, "You mean these people who are out there condemning this thing and they've never read it yet? We don't need people like that." And she started to ask another question. And he said, "This is nothing but hogwash. These people are trying to diminish us as a party and our role in this negotiations, and we won't have any of it." And he walked away. So the agreement, and I know George has done some research on that too, but I do know that in the agreement, and there were some issues that both sides don't have in it, and one of them for the Democrats is extending unemployment benefits, and the Republicans want a bigger slash of the sequestering funds. So, George, thumbnail sketch of where are we on that agreement?
Well, that is it. First of all, under sequestration, there was a cap on federal spending, and this agreement eliminates that cap, I think, about $20 billion more. And so that is one of the reasons the Tea Party people are objecting to this compromise. You know, in their mind, here we go again, we're spending more money. Now, from the Republican side, though, they've gotten some things from this increase. First of all, they were worried that the military was getting hit rather hard on the sequestration cuts. And so under this agreement, the military is getting more funds. So that would satisfy one of the Republican issues. Then the Republicans also avoid what was being predicted as another government shutdown. I mean, if you don't come to a compromise in certain things, then you start running out of money again, and you need to have a budget deficit increased. So they, from the Republican side, they felt they were hurt by this government shutdown and by this default, basically, of debt that the United States has. I mean, the United States is a very wealthy country, but as long as you keep pretending that you're poor, you know, and refuse to increase taxes or reduce spending, you know, you can't pay your bills, and so you know, this is one of the issues here.
But you see, it just like what Marty was talking about, the lockout. The Republicans are locking the Democrats out because they won't sit down and come to an agreement unless it's their position. Yeah. And so it's a lockout on the federal government. So they call it a shutdown. Well, I mean, that's beyond imagination. That you're going to stop governing a country just because you can't agree to something. I mean,
and this avoids that. I mean,
this one does, thank goodness.
So it was a win for the Republicans on that side of it. They weren't going to embarrass themselves, basically.
Yeah, it wasn't a win so much. It was saving face on their part. Because they lost a lot of credibility on that shutdown.
They're always talking about fiscal responsibility. That shutdown cost $25 billion.
Yeah, and if they would have put that toward the unemployment compensation increase, this whole thing of where is the reasoning? I don't understand this.
Well, and most of the federal workers ended up paid anyway.
Yes, they sat home and they did nothing.
Yeah, and got paid for it.
Yeah. I mean, and it wasn't their fault. They were told, we're locking you out.
Yeah.
Now, there are some things that maybe people could agree with, and in fact, unfortunately, with the federal government, you get into all of these complicated programs, and so I printed out a New York Times summary of what the agreements were in shifting the money from that sort of mindless sequestration cuts everything across the board. Now they're trying to give a little bit of discretion. You know, there's still a substantial amount of cuts from what the budget was 2 years ago. So it's not that the cuts were totally eliminated. They're just a tiny portion of the cuts were eliminated. And they do it, for example, one way is requiring medical providers to try to collect harder the 20% copay that people have when they use Medicare. You know, oftentimes the people default. They don't pay what they're supposed to pay when they receive medical treatment. Social Security will pay the 80% part, but then the medical provider
so
is
they're not
required
getting it in a timely fashion.
You know, well, if the person just keeps not paying, they can ruin their credit rating, but a lot of people don't seem to care. In fact, a lot of people probably
what can they do to force people to pay, though?
Well, I don't know, but what they're doing here is that they don't say how they're forcing the medical provider to collect. I mean, it's not that they're forcing the person to pay. They're saying that the medical provider apparently isn't making all of the required steps.
But see, that's a fluff issue, because how can you possibly force somebody to pay when they can't or won't, and to put it in a bill to say you're not doing it hard enough? What are they supposed to do? To send their posses of doctors out with? I don't understand that. How can they say that because these people aren't paying that's a problem?
Well, people can pay.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, a lot of people just don't.
How do you make a person pay your rent? You can throw them out of the place if they don't pay rent to you.
Well, that's with rent you have a little more.
So you
discretion.
refuse to treat them next time. Put their name on a no treat list. You got to do something. We're going to take a break when we think about that horrible thing, but we'll be right back, because I forget I said that. But a no treatment list, oh boy! All right, we'll be right back.
Flashy, or if your audio doesn't sound perfect, or if you're not the world's greatest camera person. We just want to see what you want us to see, and to know what you would like us to know. Your local public access television station has tools and resources to make this possible, so that we can see what you see. It's the freedom to communicate, and it's only on cable.
Behind the wheel, there is no such thing as a small distraction. A public service reminder from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, who would rather help keep your bones strong than put them back together. Speak out against distracted driving at decidetodrive.org.
Okay, folks, we're talking about the recently enacted budget agreement nationally between the Dems and the R's, and a lot of issues have come up. But one of the things that is very hurtful to a very small group of people, and again, it's this attack on the public workers. They want to make the retired federal employees pay more toward their health care.
Well, the cost of living, not to get the cost of living
and
increases.
not to get the cost of living increase to pay those things. And again, it's putting the blame, as I look at it, on this horrendous budget deficit on the backs of the people who not a thing to do with it, the working people.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here again, there's some things that aren't being talked about, and neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are talking about it. You know, you either have to increase taxes or you have to reduce expenditures if you don't want to keep borrowing money. And part of the problem is that as the baby boom generation starts to go into retirement and go on Medicare and collect Social Security, there's going to be increasing federal payments for the people, and they never really collected in Social Security and Medicare enough money to anticipate all these retirees. In other words, it's a pay-as-you-go system. Yeah. It's always been that way.
And it's poor management by the people who run it, and you can't blame the union members or the workers because the people who run the system made the mistakes.
Well, that may be true, but still there's going to be a problem.
Oh, I know
and no one wants to talk about it because no one likes the solutions. The solutions are either you have to increase the taxes or you have to reduce the benefits. And you notice a total absence. I mean, sometimes there's people talking about correcting Social Security payments with the changed CPI, with Medicare, with Social Security, rather, which would, I guess, in effect, decrease the payments over the years for Social Security. And in fact, it's interesting to me, President Obama mentioned that about a half year ago because the Republicans kept hitting him over the head, come up with something substantial. And, you know, there was no reaction at all. And, of course, President Obama dropped it because he knows it's a political hot potato. But the Republicans didn't react to it. He finally made a gesture throwing it out to do what they were telling him to do. I love these things like with the healthcare system. You know, individual mandate, that was a Republican idea. It was never a Democratic idea. So now the Republicans use the individual mandate. How dare the government tell me I have to get health care?
It's
like,
See, they've changed their acronym from the Grand Old Party to the Grand Obstructionist Party.
Because the Guardians of Privilege.
What's that?
Guardians of Privilege.
The Guardians of Privilege. Love it.
I was for it before I was against it.
That's another good one. You know, the whole thing, how can a person in good conscience espoused something 2, 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden it's the worst thing that ever happened in life. And I mean, where's the hypocrisy here?
Well, and from my mind, the losers in all of this are the younger people.
Yeah.
I mean, the older people, if they implement some of these cuts, we're going to lose.
Yeah.
But if you don't implement them, there's not enough money being set up in reserve.
So let's talk about a real solution and just up the cap. Instead of only paying Social Security for $113,000, make it $150,000.
200,000.
Yeah.
That would bring in a lot more money.
Yeah,
Well,
these millionaires, they only pay up to $113,000.
Yes.
The rest,
even the guys who make $1 billion, and we have several people making $1 billion a year.
Well, and I was listening to Charlie Rose the other day, and he said that the people he knows that are millionaires and billionaires, and he interviews a lot of them, they're willing. The ones he talks to, they're willing to pay more in taxes because they view it not only they view it as a strong America. To support education, to support everyone being healthy. So these things are not like some sort of giveaway.
No, they're not.
They're really benefiting everyone. Infrastructure. The Republicans love to say, well, we're passing along this debt to the younger generation. Well, you're also not doing infrastructure. So you're passing along, if you don't fix the roads and bridges, you're passing along deteriorated infrastructure to the younger generation.
If the roads continue to deteriorate, you'll have to buy a jackass and a sled to get around. So we're going to look for that for our kids. Let's take a look at something else that's happening. In Detroit, we all know the city went bankrupt. And what was one of the most ominous results of that? The pension plan of the employees can be terminated. I mean, that's horrible. What's next? If Altoona would have declared bankruptcy, what would have happened to the pensions of those folks? Now, they're saying, well, the people who were there will continue to get it. But according to the Detroit decision, they can garnish some of that money out of the pensions, and they can prevent the people who are now working from getting any pensions beyond. What's it going to mean as more cities
work till you die and then you're in the street?
Well, one thing it means for the city is they get no service. I mean, you call a police officer in Detroit, and I guess the average response time is 50 minutes later. The police show up. You have 40% of the street lights working.
That's right.
You don't have different services that you expect from a city. They can't provide it. There's no money. So there's all sorts of consequences lumping municipality in the same way with, let's say, a business bankruptcy, viewing it the same way. I mean, actually, talk about bankruptcy. What about General Motors and Chrysler? You know, they went bankrupt, but they did negotiate everything, including pensions and health care with those workers. And I don't know exact details, but I do know that they certainly weren't reduced by near the amount they're talking in Detroit.
No, they were not, and they've now come back to a profit-making mode now. And the government put $49 billion in, and the government got back $37 billion. So it was really a loss of $12 billion, but it saved 2.3 million jobs.
Right, and the government would have spent money anyway had all those people lost their jobs and unemployment benefits. And
it would have been more than $10 billion.
That's what I think.
And these people worked all their lives to get this pension plan. And now all of a sudden they're being told, well, because we're bankrupt now, we didn't manage the city appropriately, you're not going to be able to get your... And, you know, there is a federal pension benefit plan that's in existence right now that if companies are having trouble managing their... if they have trouble managing their pensions, they can turn them over to the pension board out of Washington, and they set a cap. And the one example they use is this one U.S. Air pilot. His pension was $100,000 a year. But the pension plan oversight committee in Washington set the maximum that you can receive at $46,000. So this guy lost $54,000.
Right, every year.
Every year of his life.
Yeah,
And that's what happened when this company was going bankrupt, and they said they couldn't afford their pension plan.
Well, right, and companies, governments are roundly criticized for not adequately funding their pension plans. But
the county did it for years.
Well, the county still does it, I think.
I
mean, they're not out of the hole. From my understanding, as part of the sale of Valley View, went towards some of the pension, but I don't think it's been made whole, as they say.
No, because it's a $30 million deficit, and they're going to put $6 million in out of the sale of Valley View. So that's still a $24 million deficit.
But I guess the point that I'm trying to emphasize is people both in the private sector and the government sector, they sort of like hope everything works out, but they don't really set money aside to make sure that things work out. When you sit down and negotiate a contract anymore, you're going to have to not only negotiate the pension plan, you're going to have to negotiate the taxes that are necessary to pay for it.
And put a mandate in there that management has got to put their fair share in.
And you notice with this 401k thing that everyone keeps throwing out as a solution, I don't hear any talk about, well, what percentage is the company going to put in?
That's another thing.
To match?
Would they match if you put 6% in?
The final point on First Energy.
Yeah.
Down in West Virginia, they formed a union, and Local 304, and then the company ignored it. They wouldn't negotiate with them. They tried to obstruct everything, all the negotiating for the contract and everything. Well, the Labor Department got involved in it, and they fined them $1.25 million, and that was paid out to all those employees that they tried to push out.
See, that's another fallacy with the National Labor Relations Board regulations, that if an employee group is certified to represent employees, and management is supposed to recognize that,
yes,
the rules of the NLRB are not strong enough with penalties, because there is a history of companies that have stalled for up to 5 years the first contract that an employee group would be able to have implemented with their workers. And the oversight authority of the NLRB is so restricted that they can't go in and fine these people and fine them till the point it becomes onerous to them to make them come to the table. And that's what happened with First Energy down there in West Virginia.
Yeah.
Because they refused to bargain.
Yep.
Okay, let's take a look at quickly the Altoona Government Study Commission. As you well know, there's the Altoona Mayor the other day. The commission has decided to write a home rule charter, and a lot of the whispering that's coming from the corridors of power in that committee, it looks like they're going to go with a strong mayor. Now, this is not in stone right now, but it raises a lot of questions about what kind of government can we have with a strong mayor if that's the only strong leader in the government.
Because that's like dictatorial. If you have just one strong leader, it's his word, and his word's final. Yeah. So you need a legislative kind of balance of power.
Yeah, and how would you set that up? Well, how would you years ago when they had a strong mayor, strong council, each of the 7 council members had a division. Like the mayor had the police, one guy had the firemen, another guy or a woman had the maintenance and so on.
Yeah.
And so what do we take a look at? I mean, and George, the timeline for this whole thing, tell us what.
Well, I'm not sure what. I think you're talking probably 2016, because one of the things, the recommendation is that Altoona go home rule. But that has to be voted on. It's just a recommendation.
Well, my understanding was they want to do it by the fall of 2014. The actual charter.
I don't know how you can do it that fast, but I really haven't been following it that closely. I do agree with that's what I've heard too, with what you're saying.
Well, maybe,
but first of all, they have to write up. I mean, just to say you want a home rule charter is insufficient. Yeah. Someone has to sit down and say specifically what powers
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think before you even do that, the voters have to agree.
See, that's the thing. Maybe that's
thing.
what they want to do by 2014 in November. Say to the city folks, will you give us the authority to develop a homeroom charter?
I think that's the first step.
That's the thing. Okay.
And so when would that be on the ballot?
Well, the question, from what I talked to a couple of members on the commission, they want this question to go before the voters of Altoona in November of 14.
Okay.
Just to give them the authority. Do you agree that we should have a home rule? And if you do, vote yes. Then the commission will have a period of time to talk about it. Do we have a strong mayor? Do we have strong council? How much are we going to pay these people? And what are their duties and roles and responsibilities?
Right.
It's a big job because they're going to have to clearly define everything about this whole thing.
And the irony is, one of the things that's caused Altoona to go into Act 47, which has sort of been the impetus for re-looking at how city government is set up, is the lack of reassessment. Altoona's been capped on what the value of the properties are because no reassessment has occurred since 1958.
Yeah.
And now the county's starting to get into trouble by having this.
There's some whispers out there now, yes.
Well, there are whispers. As best I could read the thing, they don't have enough money down the road.
I know.
And down the road, just so people understand, if the county commissioners would vote for reassessment, you're probably talking minimum 3 years, probably more likely 4 years before you have the whole process done.
And at a cost of about $3.4 million.
Well, that's
another
always
debt.
been that's
What
always
they don't
been
have
the
now,
issue.
no. And that is a big issue.
But anyway, to get back to the city, that's one of the impediments the city had in raising money. So the city's only solution was to keep cutting back on expenditures, which they've been consistently doing. And now they're cutting back on health care. They're cutting back no salary freezes. Pretty soon, people will just leave the city. I mean, somehow these people will think that city government workers are gluttons for punishment. They keep getting no in the federal level, no pay.
Enough. Well, we're down to 3 minutes, and I want to very briefly touch on, first of all, I think we ought to commend the union folks in the city of Altoona for accepting the kind of package that you saw in the paper the other day, because it does represent significant reductions in what these people have had to do. Service payments, seniority payments, more money for the health care, no raise. So I think the union employees and the non-union employees should be commended in Altoona for making that sacrifice without trying to fight it somehow. Of course, they couldn't under...
Well, right. The alternative was a bunch of people were going to be laid off.
And one other quick
they
issue.
Didn't like that either.
We talked about food stamps, and I think we don't know for sure whether or not the Farm Bill, which is separate from the agreement that Congress made, whether it will be acted upon sometime between now and the time they go home.
They want to cut $40 billion now from food stamps.
They want to cut $40 billion, which is $4 billion a year over 10 years.
Yeah.
We want to thank Marty for the panelist update, because that's an issue that has to be settled soon.
The public needs to know these things.
Yeah, and with winter power outages,
they don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Okay, I'm getting the signal from the camera folks. We want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holiday, Happy Hanukkah, whatever the case may be. We are equal in that respect. Take us out, George. I can't.
What, are you losing your voice, Frank? You're the voice of the people. We don't want you to lose your voice. We've been talking rather depressing, but actually, the United States, the economy is getting much better. So it's not all doom and gloom.
We'll see you next year.